Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sofia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self defense. This episode is sponsored by Big Tech's Ordnance, your soon to be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre and post sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their own staff to train with high-level instructors to ensure that when you as the consumer reach out, you are taken care of. Today, we have Andrew Henry of Henry Holsters. I'm so excited for this episode. There are so many unique aspects and even just our pre-show chat that I've never had in a She Shield episode to this day. So, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Thank you for having me on. I am also a Big Tech's customer.
Wonderful.
And that's where I buy all my optics and lights and various other things. And those guys do a phenomenal job. Ike and Chris and the crew are fantastic. But I think Maddie is actually the real reason that company runs. So
yes, that's so
props
true.
where props are due.
Absolutely.
So a quick run through my background. I am Henry Holsters is a CNC manufacturing shop in Bloomington, Spencer, Indiana. Bloomington is the Big Ten college town that everybody knows. Spencer is a small town next to it. And I've been making holsters since 2008, 2009. Started doing them completely one-off, custom, all by hand. And now we have a number of CNC machines. We have industrial laser and sewing and fulfillment services. And we make a much larger volume of holsters than I ever thought we'd be able to deliver. And we work with a lot of other brands. We're an OEM, so we design custom products. We do private labeling. We do third-party fulfillment in some cases. And it's really rewarding. It's a challenging, creative field. I get to design a lot of new things, do a lot of prototyping, test things in the field, and get feedback from a lot of very high-level users who have high performance standards and a lot of time on gear and understand what they really want things to do. And that has been what drives our product development for a long time, is not trying to find the thing we can sell the most of to the most people, but to focus on a small slice of a narrow corner of the holster market and really go after high performance professional end users. I grew up as a musician. I'm a violinist and a violist, and I got my college degrees in classical music performance on viola and a degree in violin making. So I'm a trained luthier, and my first employee in the holster shop was one of my classmates who's also a degreed violin maker. So for a little while, I think we actually may still have this copy on our website somewhere. We were the only holster company staffed entirely by trained and degreed violin makers, which is super geeky.
That's awesome.
But it certainly gave me a thorough background in a lot of very detail-oriented handwork. And when I started making holsters, there were big companies, Blade Tech, Blackhawk, CompTech, DeSantis, Galco, all those companies were around. The big fish in the kydex space that I remember being aware of at the time was, of course, Raven Concealment, back when their holster website was still the Malabar Front, before it even became RCS gear. And the first exposure I had to holsters was a friend of mine brought a holster. He had a hybrid holster, brought it to my shop. I was doing woodworking, guitar building at the time after college, and he asked me to modify his holster. And we did some quick changes, some little sanding and reshaping and trimming. This was back in the days when things like a combat cut to allow you to actually get a full firing grip on the gun, that was a paid optional upgrade. In a lot of these companies, like you would pay extra for an optic cut. You would pay extra for a mid-height sweat guard. You would pay extra. There was this very a la carte for all these things that have now become so standard that everybody makes them. They're just assumed to be built in. Choices of sweat guard height is like, do you want ketchup packets?
Yes.
Of course, it should be free. Everybody has this. This is not any significant difficulty to make. It shouldn't cost extra. There are still a few holster makers who do charge extra for optic cuts and certain other features, but that really has fallen by the wayside as the industry has expanded. But at the time, kydex holsters were normally, on a 12 to 20 week lead time. You would order a thing, pay for it, and then months later, it would show up, and you would hope that it fit the way you wanted, carried the way you wanted, was concealable with your clothing, your body type. And around the same time I started to get into holster making, I started to get into firearms training a little more. And in your episode with Paul Sharp, but also with the legendary lawman Chuck Haggard, talking about the context of self-defense and gear that we carry as a much broader question than just how fast are your one reload one drills or how fast can you shoot El Presidente. My first exposure to firearms training was actually in force on force, which I didn't realize at the time how unusual it was to go, do 4 or 5 force on force classes before I did much live fire square range training. But that was a huge eye opener for me. At that point, I was building custom holsters in small volume, but to be able to go to a class and spend a lot of time really testing my decision making, my problem solving, my ability to process information, my ability to verbally interact with role players and not talk myself into bad situations, not talk myself into altercations. That was really a total change in perspective for me, and has really informed a lot of my choices about the gear that I make, the kinds of customers and how we support them, and what other ongoing training I pursue. So obviously guys like Cecil Birch, Craig Douglas, Paul Sharp, the whole Shivworks collective, William April. I had a chance to take one of his classes, which was excellent, before he passed away. Those are guys who are dealing with a much more high resolution, full frame kind of problem rather than just how to shoot faster and gooder. And realizing the way that a lot of people approach the gear that companies like our company makes, mm-hmm. when they're looking really for a hardware solution to a software problem, there's this constant tension as a gear manufacturer who also trains that I don't want to present the things that I make as a solution to a problem that someone has, if the solution really needs to be, you need to go train more. You need to get time on the mat. You need to get time on the range. You need to get time in force on force. It was the first time I got shot in the face with a sim gun was just shocking. I was so unprepared for somebody at contact distance taking out a firearm, pointing it right at my face and just going, snap, without any hesitation. There was no talking at that point. It was just, I had a split second to process, that's a gun. And then I got shot right in the face.
With the sim helmet?
And
with the helmet?
I was wearing a helmet.
Okay.
I was wearing a helmet.
I was saying, I don't see the scar, but
No. I mean, I definitely have bled from sim guns before.
100% same.
Yeah. Oh.
Yes.
But it's a good time. You always have fun.
Absolutely. The adrenaline covers it right up.
The welts in the blood are just part of the fun.
Yes.
But I had gone shooting. I grew up in upstate New York, in Bloomfield, New York, which is a small rural town, not that different from a lot of places in Indiana where I currently live. And my dad hunted. I'd been to the gun range a lot of times, but New York still is very restrictive of handguns. And I was growing up there during the assault weapons ban. And so lots of firearms were heavily restricted. And I could go to a range, but as an under 21, I wasn't allowed to handle or shoot any handguns. So I shot shotguns, I shot rifles, I checked out all the cool stuff that other people had at the range. And as long as the RSO wasn't looking, they let you shoot a handgun. But I didn't have any experience with people who carried a gun, aside from a handful of cops that we knew. And so getting into that and wanting to start to carry myself after college and realizing that it was opening up a whole new world of things I didn't know was exciting, but also pretty bewildering. There's so much stuff out there, and there are so many different approaches to training, and there are so many schools of thought on what you should carry and how much you should carry and when you should utilize this tool versus that tool, all these things. Of all the things that I've done in training, force on force was huge. Understanding verbal skills, and particularly the muck concept, and managing those kinds of interactions where you're not really sure yet how it's going to go, and you're using your words as a tool, as a fence to create space, to create time, and to discern the other person's intentions. Seeing people who could practice that as a finely developed art is like watching Obi-Wan Kenobi say, these are not the droids you're looking for. And when you see that up close and realize, I don't know how to do what I just watched this other person do, and it's clearly skill-based. That wasn't luck. They didn't happen to say the right thing. I know Craig Douglas from Shivworks, South Narc, has said he wants his students to have the verbal agility of a stand-up comedian doing crowd work. And when you watch somebody who's a stand-up comic and somebody starts heckling them, and they can just take that flow in stride, and without skipping a beat, they can either snap back at the person and put them in their place, or they can deflect it and make a new friend. They have all these different tools.
Yes.
It's like watching a Jedi.
Yes. Yeah.
And recognizing that is far more likely than any piece of hardware that I carry to be a useful skill my entire life. And I can use it in any state. I can use it in any country, any place I speak the language. And I can use it regardless of what other tools I may or may not have with me. That's a soft skill, and I can take it anywhere. Really highlighted that to me as a piece that I wanted to refine and develop and work on. That and comfort with hand-to-hand contact. So I've been doing jiu-jitsu for almost 6 years. I've got a great gym in Bloomington, Vortex Martial Arts, that Mick Williams owns and runs. And he is an OG Pat Rogers and Shivworks alum. He's been training for a long time. He's a police officer, former SWAT cop, has done a lot of different things. That was a really healthy environment for me to get into, because it was not just jiu-jitsu as jiu-jitsu competition sport oriented. It was jiu-jitsu in a gym that was thoroughly informed by a bunch of guys who put hands on people for a living. And that totally changed. Sorry, I'm getting the sunlight in my side window.
Little rainbow.
That totally changed the balance of how they think about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And that was really great. So when did you start doing jiu-jitsu?
Oh my goodness. First of all, just love your story so much. We connected before this episode and learned that we are both violinists. So you started when you were 4. I started when I was 5. So I was a year late, but just so many things I'm excited to talk about with you. First of all, I started when I was 13, and because I was a violinist, you will understand this. My mom did not want me to do it. She didn't want me to break my fingers.
Don't hurt your hands.
Exactly. She wanted me to be an all-state competitor like my oldest sister. And I came home with a broken nose one day. And my mom was like, you're done. You can't do that anymore. So I continued in my traditional martial arts where we were safe and we did point sparring. Nothing was ever, too crazy.
No contact.
Exactly. And then when I was 21, I began to get curious. Actually, when I was 18, I began to get curious because we would hit the floor on accident during sparring. We'd trip over something, but then we'd stop. My coach would stop the timer and be like, stop, reassemble. I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Pause.
Yes, we can't do that on the street. So what happens? And it wasn't until I was 21, I took on Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu again, more seriously, re-broke my nose after a surgery and had a second surgery after that. So I've been super apprehensive getting back into it. I was unfortunately one of those people that got their blue belt and then skedaddled for a little bit, but I had a medical reason. Okay. And then
they always do. Having a blue belt is a medical reason.
Exactly. You're right. But then I went to the Guardian conference put on by concealedcarry.com, and I talked to Paul Sharp, and it just hit me. There was really no excuse to not train at all. It really hit me. And that's when I ordered a helmet from Redbeard Combatives. I have a partner that I trust with my actual life and knows. And the other day we were doing an armbar from mount after doing a certain sweep from guard, and it was this whole thing, and we were kind of speeding up as we went. But every time she would get ready to throw her leg over for the armbar, she would pick it up, slow down, and then she'd go back into it a little bit faster. So she's someone I trust very closely. That's the long answer of when I started. And
I thought Paul's description in his episode of how to tell whether a gym is a good gym was really interesting. It was if you walk into a gym and it's all 20 to 25-year-old guys going 150% all the time, that's not a safe place to train.
Absolutely.
My gym is in a college town, so every fall we get a fresh crop of testosterone loaded
Ooh.
18-year-old high school athletes who come in and they're brand new white belts. They want to do jiu-jitsu and they spaz out so hard.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we have a decent number of female students at our gym, which is
Okay.
excellent. Our gym has a very healthy culture and started a kids program a year and a half ago. Hadn't had one before that, but my oldest son is in the kids program
Very
and it's
nice.
excellent. I occasionally go
Awesome.
to the kids classes and get to be sort of an assistant coach helping some of the kids work through their moves.
That's awesome.
But when all the new meathead white belts show up, I just don't roll with them for a few months until some
Yes.
of the upper belts have had a chance to break them in a little bit
Yep.
and tell them to chill out.
Yes. Show them and tell them,
Even
right?
just even just this past week, we had two brand new white belts at the gym, and we were working on some very basic guard positioning stuff, just really simple stuff. And we had an odd number of students, so I got asked to pair with these two new guys and just walk them through the drill we were working on. And I got down on my back, and we were working on just grips from top side. And the first guy grabbed the cuff of my pants, and I could feel his arm shaking from the tension. And I went, "Hey," I'm laying there on my back, and this guy's got my legs. I'm like, "Hey, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
This is just drilling. There's no resistance.
Right.
I'm not going to surprise you with anything. You should be relaxed."
Totally.
But the second he laid hold of me, I could just feel his entire body was tense. And I'm like, all right, before he does anything, before he moves,
Right.
before he tries, and I'm going to just dial it down.
I like it.
Just chill, just
Yeah.
relax. And there are still moments when you're like, is this white belt going to zig or is he going to zag? Do I need to be worried about this?
Yep.
And if a young, strong, I'm almost 40. Do I turn 40 this year? I turned 40 this year. I'm going to be turning 40 this
I
summer.
was say I don't know.
I don't recover nearly as fast as I would have if I was 20. And I'm not as flexible as I would. Things hurt more sooner. And I've had some broken toes, and I separated a AC joint in my shoulder, and I just got swept wrong, and I came down right on it, just right, and it popped. And
Dang.
yeah, you get injuries. And so
Yes.
when a young white belt grabs hold of me and they don't really know what they're doing, they don't really know the position, they decide they've got a limb and they're just going to yank on it, I just tap, because
Yes.
I don't have to, I can't be like, oh no, I can't let this new white belt tap me. I'm a blue belt.
Right.
It's like, no, I don't want this kid to injure me out for the next 2 months.
Yes, 100%.
I don't care if he taps me. I want to be here for class the rest of this week.
Yes, 100%. And that balance is it's so delicate. And I remember this, I don't even know, the third time I broke my nose. It was the most serious break. And every time I think back, I think,
You should
man,
take up boxing. You've already got it in the bag.
for real.
Broken nose, no big deal. Take up
Might
boxing.
as well. Well, I have had 2 nose surgeries. Before my second one, I went just all out competitive rolling at my gym. I was like, man, like this is the last time I can put my head into someone like this. And because of that, I hit it a lot. And by the time I showed up to my surgery, my surgeon post surgery, he ended up having me in there an hour longer than he planned. So I was under anesthesia for 4.5 hours, and or maybe 5.5. I can't remember. My mom was worried. And he said,
I was out.
yeah,
Don't remember.
exactly. He was like, man, there was a lot of inflammation. What could that be from? Your break was a while back. And I was like, no idea, man. Like, it's crazy. So anyway, all that to say, yes, I did take advantage of that. But the guy that broke it the worst, like out of the 4 or 5 breaks I've had, my coach, when I was training Muay Thai, he wanted to like work in a wrestling component because a lot of the guys there were trying to become professional wrestlers. And when I got down on the ground, I was so like wrapped up in jiu-jitsu, and my coach wanted us to apply striking to the ground. He had this very interesting approach to it. I appreciated it because it was more real world, and I was like, this is what I need, right? But this dude like elbowed me while we were on the ground, and it just clean elbow across my face. And I remember like the snap, I remember the pain, and I was like, oh man, I think you just broke my nose. And he was like, so do you need a break? And I was like, yeah, kind of. But it was also an
I'm
ego
done for
move of
this
me.
round.
Exactly. Yes. And then funny story, I don't know if I've told this on the podcast yet, but we were in this really crappy warehouse and I went to the women's bathroom, which I was like the only woman that trained there out of like maybe 3. Okay. But that particular class, not many women went to. And you can see why. I go to the bathroom, right? And I'm holding my nose and I grab some paper towels for the blood. And I like accidentally, I was like leaning on the bathroom stall or something. And I like lean a little heavier than normal. And all the stalls fall over like dominoes. I felt like it was the worst series of events. Like broke my nose. My partner was like, "So do you need to stop?" And I was like, "Yes." So like that was weird. My coach was like, "Where are you going? We're still training." And I was like, "I just need a minute." I walked to the bathroom. I knock over the stalls. I was like, "I'm leaving." So it was a very weird day, but anyway, yes, white belts, they're scrappy, and while it may be street applicable, it's not worth it to injure yourself and not be able to go
Yeah.
back. I love that you're talking about that. I don't think that's been a huge topic.
Well, this, coming from a classical music background, which had a very strong hierarchical, teacher student
Mhm,
relationship built into it.
mhm,
Um, the same way, although this would be a topic all its own, um, the music world has had historically a lot of problems with teacher student abuse
mm,
and unequal power in those relationships, leading to really horrible outcomes for students. A lot of martial arts gyms have the exact same problem.
mhm,
And one of the ways that you can tell whether you're in a good gym is whether or not you feel free to say no to any role you want.
mhm.
Anybody you don't want to roll with, you don't have to roll with. If there's any pressure on you to roll with somebody you don't want to roll with, that's bad. Now, certainly, not all roles are equally comfortable.
Right.
We've got some guys who are way bigger than me, and they're never my first choice for a role because I know it's just going to be a rough 5-minute round.
Right.
And it's not because they're being mean, it's just
Right.
because they're
Right.
a lot bigger than me, and that's just extra work.
Right.
But certainly, if I declined to roll with somebody and then felt pressured that I had to roll with them anyway,
Mm,
and this is especially the case, um, more so the case for female students, you should feel free to say no to any role with anybody you want, including any coach, including the coach of the school. You should feel free to decline any role at any time. And if you can't, or you don't feel you can participate in that gym without letting other people decide your roles for you,
mm,
then that's a problem. Um,
absolutely.
so that
Yeah.
is a whole can of worms, a whole separate topic.
Right.
But my experience in classical music growing up, a I had a really eye-opening experience as a sophomore in high school that led to me leaving the teacher I'd been with for 10 years at that
Oh.
point because I went away for the summer. I had a chance to study with the co-concert master of the Philadelphia Orchestra,
Mm,
which Philadelphia Symphony, at that time, top 5 in the world, phenomenal orchestra. And it would have been like shooting at the same range with the same NRA certified instructor for years and years and years, and then going and taking ECQC and going, oh my gosh, I've missed a huge portion of that. I've not understood the scope of this problem at all. And I came back home to Rochester from that summer and tried to talk to my teacher about like this incredibly eye-opening experience that I'd had, and he kicked me out of his studio immediately. He cursed me out in front of my dad. I was a 14-year-old kid, 14 or 15-year-old kid. He absolutely ripped my head off
Oh my
and then
goodness.
kicked me out of his studio. And
Yeah.
and it was clearly all about his ego.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Because what I was telling him was I just had my horizons blown wide open. Like the
Yeah.
whole world has just expanded to me. And there are a whole bunch of things I need to be doing now that I hadn't known about before.
Yeah.
And all he was hearing was, I don't think you're a good teacher. I just found a better teacher, and I don't think you're a good teacher anymore. And he had a very, very strong sense of self, a very strong ego. A lot of basically students either stayed with him on good terms all the way through high school till they went away to college or conservatory, or just like I did, and I'd seen this happen to other students before me, they got to a certain point, push came to shove, he blew up and kicked them out. And I'd seen that happen to a number of students, and I didn't really understand it as a kid. You don't understand that kind of dynamic. But any hint that he was not going to be the teacher that got me all the way through to Juilliard was such a threat to his ego that you were done. The minute you raised the question of, hey, do you think I should transition to another teacher for my last 2 years or 3 years of high school to prep for conservatory? Like, he was a good teacher, but he was not a professional performing musician at that time. And like, we have the RPO, the Rochester Philharmonic. There's a bunch of great violinists there that are world class. Like, should I step up to studying with one of them in prep for college? To ask that question was to be done.
Oh my
And
goodness.
there are a lot of self-defense schools and streams of training and thought that are a lot that way, where like, if you're in the orthodoxy, you're good. If you question the orthodoxy, you're gone. And what I've really enjoyed in classes like Craig's is we'll test it.
Yeah.
You have an idea? You have a question? Why would I prefer this underhook to that other possible thing? Well,
Absolutely.
grab a tack knife trainer. Let's set up that position. Try to not get stabbed.
Yes.
Okay. Take the tack knife back. Set up this other position. Try to not get stabbed. See a difference?
Right.
You want to try them both again? Go 2 for 2? See a difference?
Right.
Absolutely.
I love
that
that you
kind
brought
of-
this up. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Keep going.
That kind of willing to test it, willing to try it, ego. I don't have to take the trainer's word for it that this works. I get to test it.
Yes.
And on the gear development side, as a holster company, I don't want to try to dictate to people what their carry should be. I don't want to dictate to them what kind of belt they need to have. And when we were talking about things to discuss, I brought up the idea of what's old is new again. And just like fashion, like,
Yeah.
the number of guys who are now sort of making it cool to deep carry snub-nosed revolvers, when 5 years ago, if you carried a snub-nosed revolver, you were either a FUD or you were going to be dead in the streets tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's this recurring cycle, and people, I remember seeing somewhere a meme, it was the graphic of like, your daily carry progression, which is you start off with something basic, and then you get a Glock. You start off with whatever, then you get a Glock 19, then you end up with a Roland Special, then you branch out into something a little bit more weird and bespoke, staccato or LTT or something a little fancier, and then you rediscover the simplicity and the beauty of a 5-shot snubby revolver. You carry it everywhere, and then at a certain point, you're like, I feel like I want more capacity, and you go back to a Glock 19, and this whole cycle just repeats and repeats and repeats.
Yes.
And
Interesting.
as a holster company, I started off making hybrid holsters. That was the first thing that I made, with a specific focus on a full 2-piece kydex shell with a thin, flexible leather backer, because I was very aware of the limitations of the, at the time, Crossbreed was the dominant company, but now there's a zillion copycats, of a single-sided kydex shell riveted to a thick leather backer. The leather wears out over time. It starts to flex. The retention of the holster is variable. And when you unholster, the pocket collapses and you end up with the classic, like, tipping the muzzle of the gun in towards your body to nose it into the holster cavity. I'd seen that. And I knew that it could be designed around if you had a full kydex shell, but you wanted your belt attachment points spread out for greater stability and to keep the overall package a little thinner right where the gun is. Anytime you put a belt clip directly on top of the gun, you're stacking thickness and you create concealment challenges. They're not insurmountable, but you have to surmount them. They're there. And so we developed this fighting hybrid, which had a very low cut leather backer. It didn't have a full leather sweat guard.
Okay.
And it solved a lot of the problems that I saw inherent in hybrid holster designs at the time, but it was so time consuming to produce.
Mm.
I could not scale up production, and it was so intensive handwork. Like every single leather backer was individually hand cut. So for a
Wow.
long time, I was doing individual holsters by appointment, more like I was a bespoke tailor than a
Mhm.
manufacturing shop. You would come to my shop, you'd bring your firearm, you'd dress however you would normally like to dress when you conceal carry, and then we would have a discussion and a fitting, and we would talk about where you wanted to carry and ride height and cant and all these things, and then I would sketch this thing out and template it and then make your holster. And it was normally like a 3.5 hour process for an appointment.
Wow.
And I couldn't scale it up. It couldn't actually become a company. It could have stayed a hobby, but it couldn't have been a company.
Without decreasing quality.
Yeah, it would have been very, very hard to make money, any kind of
Mm.
real money that would allow the company to grow and afford to take on and train employees. When you have a very high manual skill process, the delta between bringing in somebody and then getting them trained up to the point where they can produce quality work that you want to send out the door with your name on, the more skill intensive the work is, the longer that runway is to get them up to speed, which means you need to have enough excess money to fund the cost of them training but not producing
Mm.
for
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
And so I started getting into CNC machining in 2014 to make molds to form kydex holster shells. And as soon as I did that, it was obvious this was the direction I wanted to go. So I taught myself enough CNC machining to be dangerous and started making all these molds. I started consulting and doing mold design work for a bunch of other companies, many of which are not around anymore. There was a huge renaissance, well, not even a renaissance, a huge naissance, a first-time birth of tons of small holster companies. And the leading edge of that was guys like John Hauptman at Filster, because he did tons and tons of YouTube videos about how to make a kydex holster. And up to that point, there'd been almost nothing about that. And so I was on the leading edge of that wave along with John. John and I met each other back then and got to be friends, and have continued to work together very closely ever since. And I think he and I have a uniquely great relationship in that we both have a background in the arts. We're both very able to visualize things and talk both conceptually and practically about what a design needs to accomplish, what its limits are, what its construction methods will be, and what likely challenges we'll encounter. We can basically talk through a product and do the first 4 or 5 iterations virtually without having to actually make a thing. And John's background is in fine arts. He does very, very good drawing. So oftentimes he'd bring me an idea and say, hey, I've been thinking about doing this or that, and would show me a beautiful sketch of the thing. And we talk about how it was going to work. And then I take it and turn it into a detailed, 3D CAD model that we can then CNC machine a mold out of and produce parts from. And the process of designing gear is really interesting to me because a customer has a need, a felt need. Whether or not it's an actual need is a separate question, actually. But they have a felt need to carry a certain thing with them, some tool, some piece of equipment. And they have their own unique body type, their clothing style and fashion. They have their daily context of where they carry and who they're around, where they work, where they live, where they go to church, where their kids go to school, where they shop for groceries, what overall town they're in, do they ride public transport. There's a billion potential factors that all combine to make their unique context. And even though every person's context is different, concealment is art and science. And the science part of it is, how do we make things blend into the human body? How do we make shapes and orient gear in positions that are optimal for it to be absorbed, visually absorbed in the shape and the outline of the human body? And then the art of concealment is, how do you create the overall social camouflage, whether that's clothing, whether that's posture, how you stand, how you walk, how you talk, all those things factor into how other people perceive you and how much mechanical concealment you need in order to fly under people's radar. I'm good friends with Greg Ellifritz. I've known Greg for a long time. And I remember him having a funny article one time about choosing graphic t-shirts to enhance concealment. And he just showed side-by-side pictures. He's wearing a zip-up, neutral-colored hoodie with the zipper partly down so you can see part of the graphic on the graphic tee. And it seems kind of weird. Just showing part of a brightly colored shirt that has some graphic on it draws people's attention. It's just like a pocket square in a man's suit coat.
Yes. Yeah. That makes sense.
And Craig is, of course, my,
yes.
my fashion,
inspiration.
I don't know what I would even call him. Inspiration. Yeah.
Yes.
But sort of my guiding light of people who actually care about fashion and then present it in a way that it starts to make some sense to me. But if you have those accents, those things, you can actually place other people's attention. It's just like sleight of hand. Watching somebody who's a gifted magician, they know where you're going to look because they're making you look there. They're not guessing where you're going to look and hoping you don't see the trick. They know that if they do this, you're going to look at this. And all those little things, even I like really bright colors. I'm dressed in pretty neutral work shirt today, but I normally like really bright colors. Orange is my favorite color. I drive a bright orange car. My favorite hoodie is bright orange. I have an orange watch. I like brightly colored stuff. And for a long time, part of my concealment journey was figuring out my own clothing style. What I want to wear, what I like to wear, what's comfortable and practical for me.
I relate to that.
And when I discovered that I could actually pull off Hawaiian shirts, and not like anything, there are certain kinds I can't. Anything that's got parrots on it, I don't do. Like Hawaiian shirts, I don't do.
Yeah.
But shirts that are very loud and brightly patterned.
Yeah.
I had it first, Boogaloo Boys. You can't take the cool shirts. But realizing that gave me, in a weird way, a totally different degree of social permission in terms of how I talked to people.
Yeah.
It was like discovering a Jedi mind trick. It was discovering a class hack for a whole bunch of social interactions. If you are at the checkout line anywhere and you're wearing a really, really brightly like neon colored Casio, like early 90s G-Shock style watch, people be like, oh man, I love that watch. I used to have one like that. And just the permission to interact with people.
Yeah.
It allows me to practice my verbal skills all the time because that's a perishable skill. And it also puts people in a good mood. Being able to put the people around you who you've never met before at ease and in a good mood is a self-defense skill for your entire life. And it has nothing to do with any of the gear I sell. I might be carrying gear or not. And my daily carry, generally, I put on my gun when I put on my pants. I carry a P365 XL. I carry a clinch pick. I have a flashlight in my pocket. I've got palm pepper spray in my back pocket. I carry my cell phone, chapstick, and a little utility folding knife, usually a Spyderco. Nothing crazy. And then a pen. I always have a pen.
Nice.
Because I'm always thinking of things and having to write them down on whatever available surface I can find.
Right.
Child's arm, arm of the couch, doesn't really matter.
Nice.
But even if I didn't have all those things, those verbal skills and that ability to strike up a friendly conversation with people is really useful to me.
Yeah.
And gives me a lot more social confidence to not feel like, oh, I'm afraid to talk to anybody right now. I don't want to feel. COVID was really hard on people for this.
Yes.
This sense of by standing any closer to anybody or talking to anybody, I'm invading their space and they don't want me to do that. That's really psychologically hard to deal with. But the most dangerous and most capable people that I know are the ones who are most comfortable going someplace without all the tools. Because for them, it's not really Like I have to check these 5 boxes. If I don't have A, B, C, D, and E, I'm as good as dead. I'm helpless without my tools. Then no, the people who are confident and competent and dangerous, the tools are just tools. The gun is not its own self-actualized solution to problems. It's just a tool.
Right.
And if you have to go somewhere where you can't take it with you for any variety of reasons, if that totally changes your mindset, like I'm helpless now, and you have this sort of deer in the headlights, like I can't defend myself now because I don't have my gun, that's a whole separate issue that has nothing to do with gear.
Agreed. You just pulled a memory from my archives in my brain.
Okay.
Did not think this. I have to tell you this. So,
Okay.
seriously, I could listen to you talk for hours. So I'm so excited to check out your podcast, which we need to plug, by the way. But anyway, so in Spain, I studied there for a semester to finish my Spanish minor. And because I wanted to just be fully immersed into Spanish, I thought if I could just
Was the
speak
food
Spanish.
amazing?
So hold on.
There's another core memory right there.
Right. You brought it back. So I'm not going to lie to you. I paid for my entire trip through teaching. And don't get me wrong, my parents were so supportive, but I really wanted to pay for it myself. I was like, I need to do this. If I can't do this, I can't adult, you know? So I paid for my entire trip. So that wasn't a lot of money that I got from doing biology supplemental instruction at my college. So I actually ate quinoa cakes, which is like rice cakes, and turkey for like 2 meals a day. And then I would maybe eat out, but I was always so nervous.
You heard the food in Spain was great.
I heard it was amazing. And my dad actually came and visited with me and took me out to dinner one night. And I was like, oh my God, this is so good. It really was good. We went to a very fancy restaurant that served fish, and those meals meant so much more to me because I like really tried to scale while I was there. But oh man, I wish I could be like, yeah, I had a great meal every single day. Anyway, I remember being with this group of friends, and this is when I'm trying to think of the timeline. I had not yet owned my own firearm. I had just been doing Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu. I felt like a lean, mean machine because I had been going through fight camp. I had walked 30 minutes just to school and 30 minutes back in Spain. I got like super lean around this time, and I felt like I could.
Quinoa cakes will do that to you.
Right? Seriously, when I think about what I was eating, yeah, I'm not surprised I lost so much weight, but it was out of necessity, so it doesn't feel as good now. But anyway, so back then though, I was with this group of girls, and we all talked about like what we did back home, what our hobbies were. So they, like when I'm sure when you meet someone that's not in this space, they're like, wow, you're a badass. Like I should mess with you.
Or you're a loony. Like,
yes, one of the two.
You sound like a paranoid maniac.
Yes. So some of them did think that, but mostly they were like, we need to bring Sofia when we go out. Like we need her with us. And I remember feeling like, damn, I wish I hadn't said anything. And also I'm honored, So we were out one night walking to a bar where we had like a meet and greet event with all the other students, but we had to walk because all of us, we wanted to save money. We wanted to live the Spanish life. Everybody walks. But this guy followed us for so many blocks. I don't remember exactly how long, but I remember I was the only one in the group who noticed him until I kind of motioned to a girl and was like, hey, do you see him? And she was like, oh, yikes. Like, okay. I finally got to this place where I was like, if I don't do something, like this is going to get so much worse. And we were walking in pitch dark. There were some street lights, but it was not ideal. So I turned around and I was like, can we help you? And he was like, oh no, like, where are you guys going? And I was like, you don't need to know that, but you've been following us and that's not okay. Like, I remember feeling like the only person in the group that could probably do anything. So I just came out. And then I fast forward in my head to managing unknown contacts, Craig Douglas. I had to stand across from this random guy I'd never met. He was so nice. He was so kind. He was like, hi, nice to meet you. Very soft-spoken. And then Craig was like, I'm going to need you to yell at this guy. And I was like, oh, okay.
I want you to punch him in the throat with your voice.
Exactly. And I remember being like, hey, stop, get back. Like, I could barely do it. I was like, and I was like laughing to
Please.
cope. Yeah, please,
Yeah.
please get back. Anyway, you just brought that memory up. There's something you said that triggered it, but yes, the verbal exercise. I was in Spain, right? At that point, it was like day 2. I
Hmm.
didn't have time to go and buy a knife, and that was my goal. I was like, I'm gonna get to Spain. I'm gonna go buy a cheap knife. I can carry it with me everywhere, and then I'll just leave it when I come back, or I'll try to put it in my suitcase. I just didn't trust customs with my really nice, knives that I loved. I didn't want to like lose a knife. So
Are you a knife collector?
kind of. My mom has
Mm.
purchased SOG knives for me my entire life. Like when I was like 9, 10, she put them in my
Yep.
stocking and I got one every year. So just something like yeah, sure. Yeah,
Santa
a
brings SOG
collector.
knives. Amazing.
Yeah, even though they're not like cold steel level knives, I still didn't want to lose them.
Yeah,
They mattered to me. So I bought
totally.
a knife there, but otherwise my voice was the only thing I had when I was there.
Hmm.
You've just made such a good point. I've never thought of that, how it transcends law. Like it's because it's always with you anyway. I love that you brought that up.
One other
Yeah.
piece of for me particularly was from 2010 to 2016 while I was building the holster company up. I was working as an elementary and middle school teacher.
Wow.
And the same way that like when you're in front of a class, you have to have enough vocal projection and clarity. You have to learn people's names quickly. You have to
Hmm.
understand how to capture and maintain the attention of a person who doesn't
Hmm.
really want to pay attention to you. But even with all that, the first time I was in one of Craig's classes and we were working on muck, I had exactly the same experience you did, which is after a few reps, my training partner was like, I think you could be a little louder. You could be a little more forceful with that. And I'm
Hmm.
like, am I really not executing this well? I understand what I'm doing. It's a
Right.
non-threatening environment. No one's going to get hurt, their feelings hurt if I yell at them. And
Right.
yet I'm not doing it. Why am I
Hmm.
not doing it?
Right.
And
Yes.
realizing that it would not matter what I had strapped to my waistband.
Hmm.
It would not matter what I was carrying in what caliber and how many reloads I had. If I can't get over the hump of using my hands, keeping my fence up, and using my voice,
Hmm.
all that other stuff is so far downstream from there that by the time we get to it, it's not really going to matter that much. It's not that it won't matter.
Absolutely.
Certainly, a firearm is an incredibly effective tool,
Right.
but it's not its own solution. And when I
Absolutely.
talk to potential customers or current customers, I'm always trying to find a balance. I don't want our company to market on fear. I don't want to be a gear company that says, just imagine you didn't buy the product that we sell
Mm,
and then your
yes.
family's being murdered in front of your eyes
Right.
because you couldn't stop it because you didn't buy our gear.
Yep. There are so many
And the
like that.
amount of absolutely conscienceless, manipulative marketing
Hmm.
in the firearms and defense space is horrible. I want no part of it. I do not want to trade on somebody's fears. That doesn't mean I don't want people to have a realistic assessment of their risk profile.
Yes.
If you ride public transit like I did in college, there are times you're going to be around people that you immediately know are not safe to be around. But if you don't, like the
Hmm.
three stupid rule, the classic don't go stupid places and do stupid things with stupid people.
Right.
Well, yeah, I think it was. I'm trying to think. I think it might have been William April when I was in his class. He said, what what good happens after 1 a.m.?
Yes.
Literally
Yeah.
nothing. Like nothing. If you're out
Right.
and about on the town after 1 a.m., nothing good is happening. If you're there intentionally, you shouldn't be. And if you're there unintentionally, other things have gone wrong for you to end up out and about at 1 a.m. And so
Yes.
I know and have known many customers and many people in the defense and firearm space over the years who take the I have to be armed at all times. And if at any point I'm compelled to be unarmed, I am intensely preoccupied by that fact, and I can't enjoy or fully participate in anything else. Because that absence of this tool that I have to have, the lack of talisman in my waistband, is I can't overcome it. It's the single thing that just dominates my thoughts the entire time. I'm at my child's music recital at a school in some other town. They won all state. They go to this competition. I can't carry a firearm there, and I miss the entire performance because all I'm thinking is, what if somebody stands up in this room with an AK and I don't have my Glock? And it's like, you are
Yeah.
missing your entire life. I don't
Yes.
want to stoke people's fears and encourage them to be paranoid. At the same
Yes.
time, there's so much crap gear out there.
Yes.
There's so much badly designed, badly thought out, badly made stuff that will simply break or
Mm-hmm.
not perform if you actually have to use it. I think it was Chuck who said, what if I gave you a gun and said, this is loaded, you can carry this to protect yourself. And then when you finally need to pull it out, it's an Acme flag gun and it goes bang and a little flag unfurls. If you
Mm-hmm.
think you have a capability and it's not actual, when you realize that, that is so sobering. Like, have you ever heard the term a dead man's gun?
Yes.
So-and-so, like, I found out I was carrying a dead man's gun. Like, or like, everyone's like, I just found out today that I've been carrying with an empty chamber for the past week and didn't realize it. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a thing that happens to almost everybody at some point when they start carrying a gun.
100%.
They don't have really robust routines for handling
Mm-hmm.
that firearm. Like, my firearm gets cleaned on a certain schedule and it almost never gets unloaded. I have a safe in my house that I store it in. I carry it when I'm at work, unless I'm taking it off to try on holsters that we're building, in which case I'm locking it up at work, but I'm leaving it in the holster. I'm leaving it loaded. I am not dropping the mag out and racking around out of that gun every night when I come home.
Right.
The gun comes off my body into the safe. In the morning, pants are on, gun's out of the safe, onto my belt. It's the same thing all the time. That level of consistency takes a lot of the doubt of, did I remember to check that? I distinctly remember my press check phase. I had a press check phase. I was carrying a hybrid holster that I built. I had recently seen for the first time Magpul Dynamics Art of the Dynamic Handgun. It was like circa 2010 or
Mm-hmm.
2011. I saved up money and bought myself an M&P because it seemed like that was the greatest gun at the time. And every morning I would load it up, chamber around, press check, hit the back plate, make sure it was in battery, holster it up, and then go start my day. And at a certain point, I'm like, why am I unloading this and reloading this every day? What is that getting me? Why am I doing this? It's a chance to mess it up every single time. Every time I'm handling this loaded gun out of the holster, I give myself a chance to mess it up. Why am I doing that?
So do you mean, would you say this doesn't apply to someone who maybe has like one gun for their competition, dry fire, home defense, and concealment? Like, are you saying if you have multiple firearms in the household?
Well, so the question of what you do if you have multiple firearms, and especially what you do if you dry fire. Dry fire is its own thing, and I
Mm-hmm.
recommend Annette Evans' book, The Dry Fire Primer, as a great place to start for a lot of understanding the concepts of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think on the gear side, the dry fire is super, super useful in terms of giving you reps on building your grip, getting your sight presentation, getting your sight alignment, getting a clean trigger press. Those are all mechanical things and you need reps on them. But as a gear designer and a holster maker, I am far more interested in the stuff that involves weapon access.
Okay.
Not because sight alignment and trigger press are not important, but because there's a linear progression of things. And if you can't access your firearm, you can't press your trigger. And so a lot of the things that I think are most interesting, that are most under practiced, can be done with a blue gun.
Mm.
Practicing clearing your cover garment and getting your grip, you can do with a blue gun. You never have to unload it. You never have to reload it. It's completely inert. You can use it in your car. You don't have to have a solid backstop to safely point it at. With a blue gun, you can basically practice with it anywhere. You can
Mm.
get on the jiu-jitsu mats and you can grapple. You can take it to class, and after class, throw your holster on in your street pants and say to one of your friends, hey, I'm trying this new holster. I want to just lightly roll for 2 minutes. Try to take the gun off me.
Yes.
Don't armbar me. This is going to be I know I've got a gun and you now know I've got a gun. Try to take the gun from me. I'm not going to try to draw it. We're not working on in-fight weapons access to two. For me, I just want to see how hard it is for me to retain the holster on my body and retain the blue gun in my holster. Take it from me. And that would not be a thing that I would ever recommend doing with a live firearm. You should not bring a live firearm to your gym and get on the mats with other students around and roll around with a live gun. Obviously,
Right.
a loaded gun,
Right.
completely out of the question.
Of
But
course.
even a unloaded and verified but live firearm is not the kind of thing you should be doing that with. Blue guns are one of the best investments. If you carry a gun, having a blue gun analog for your carry piece is one of the best dollar for dollar investments I think you can make in any kind of training gear. It's right up there with owning your own combatives helmet so you can actually have somebody hit you. A blue gun is, once you've paid for it, it's like $55. You have it forever. It doesn't wear out. It doesn't rust. And you can do all kinds of stuff with it.
Absolutely.
Super useful.
Would you say that the situation varies so for USPSA, for example, I like to simulate the trigger press. I would be concerned if I just trained with a blue gun that when it would be time to press the trigger, I would almost hesitate, almost like pulling your strikes. So
Right.
how would you balance that?
Well, when I talked about being in my press check phase, I had a certain mode of handling my firearm, which involved not storing it till I'd unloaded it and then reloading it before I put it on my body. And that was all unnecessary administrative handling.
I see.
And at that time, I was living in a rented house. I didn't have a gun safe in my bedroom, so I was storing the gun unloaded on a high shelf. But I don't want to leave it loaded. It's not locked up. And that was its whole own thing. Like, I've got 5 kids. If you have firearms in the house, they should be locked up. You should work with a method that allows you to access them reliably and quickly, but they should either be on your person or locked up. And so when I come home, my gun stays on until I get in my pajamas, and then it immediately gets locked up in a quick access safe that I can get to and get my firearm out quickly. But even there in the safe, the loaded firearm is still in a holster. I have to pop the safe open, get the thing out, draw it out of the holster, then it's in my hands. But working the trigger is a whole skill. And I would never say to somebody, you don't need any trigger press dry fire. You can use a blue gun for everything. Although even though your initial draw and presentation and getting your finger on the trigger, you can do that with a blue gun. There are a lot of products like the dry fire mag that's a spring-loaded resetting thing so you can make the trigger reset. Because one of the big gripes about dry fire is, well, yeah, I have to like rack the slide every time and it's annoying. Well, yeah, if you want to simulate a string of fire and it's important to you to feel the actual trigger press break on every one of the shots in that string of fire, then yeah, doing that with an unloaded gun is a challenge because it doesn't cycle. It doesn't do that. But even at live fire training classes on the range, where I've seen students make the most gains in terms of speeding up their draw to good first hit is not right at the trigger press. It's getting all the garment clearing and weapon access stuff figured out. People give away tons of time there. And you can practice all that with a blue gun for free, totally safely. So it's not one or the other, But if the idea is I always have to dry fire with a live gun and the dry fire isn't useful unless I get trigger presses,
Mm.
that's kind of I think a misconception
Absolutely.
in the personal practice space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I just wanted to see, I wanted to kind of add some more variables and see what you thought of that. Recently, I had a conversation with a certain influencer at SHOT Show, and she's a big proponent of the sticky holsters, which, by the way, I did not know that sock holster was like a almost borderline offensive term for like sticky holsters. So the kind
We
of
just call them gun buckets.
makes sense. No, totally. And I'm generally not a proponent, let me be clear.
Yep.
But when we were talking, I kept calling it a sock holster. And I've told this to a particular person that I mentioned to you before this episode,
Yep.
another female influencer. And she was like, "Oh my God, you called it that when you were talking to her?" And I was like, "Yes. Why? What's wrong? Are they not interchangeable?" And she was laughing so hard. So
Emotional damage taken.
for real. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I'm not like condescending like that. I could never just work that into a conversation. And actually, I told this woman, I said, she kind of just assumed I didn't agree with her. She kind of said it herself, and I didn't, I didn't say anything, but I did tell her.
Didn't
I was
disagree.
like, "What?"
You didn't disagree. She's like, I assume you're not on the same page with me. And you're like, I'm not arguing. I'm not going to disagree with that.
Exactly. Yes. And I told her at the end of our conversation, I was like, "You know what? You just gave me a great idea. Something that I have found is missing in the industry is the bridge between concealment technique and weapons-based entanglement, especially in the women's realm. Like Annette Evans is like the only woman that really pops into my head that talks about that, promotes it, trains it. So I've started doing things like I took my fanny pack in from Vertex. They just came out with the everyday fanny pack. And oh my gosh, I trained with my purple belt training partner, the one I was mentioning earlier. She choked me with it. She controlled me with it. I had such a hard time getting my hand on the zipper and just even trying to pull. There was so much that I learned, and I was like, damn. And what after this video, after I released it, I went to SHOT Show. I had this conversation with the influencer, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start like having my friend attack me with different holsters on. Like, I'm just going to go for it. We're going to work exactly what you mentioned, try to get my gun. And then I'll work on trying to actually access it. But two different like little pieces of context. But I have a sticky holster from sock holster from when Taser actually sent me like their setup to
Bolt.
get my, what'd you say?
The bolt?
Yes, the bolt. I think it's the Bolt 2 or something. But I actually have that, and I was like, maybe I should just put that on and see what happens with a blue gun, because I love being able to like pull up a video and be like, hey, watch this video of what happened when someone is like,
I have the receipts.
Yes. So I have a list. I have so many things I'm getting ready to try with my training partner. I've been trying to go twice a week, one time a week, just train. Don't think about content. Don't think about, because I'm always thinking like, I should be recording this. And I hate that. It impedes my training. But the second day,
Mat time is super special to me in that it's time when I'm not thinking about business. I'm not thinking about taxes. I'm not thinking about hiring. I'm not thinking about updating our website. I'm
So
just thinking about not getting choked.
Yes,
I'm just
exactly.
thinking about improving my position.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know I just went on a tangent, but I love that you brought that into play. Like, something I've been struggling with. It's been so long since I've been to ECQC. I almost feel like a fraud when I talk about it because I've only been once. And I try to say that a lot. Like, I've only been
I
once.
have actually not been to ECQC. I've trained with Craig a couple times. I've done edge weapon overview.
Yes.
But I haven't been to ECQC. And it's actually coming to Ohio not that far from me later this spring. And I'm planning to go to it. So this is finally the year. When I first started training Force on Force, in my first class, there were a couple guys there who had been to ECQC. And when they described it, I'm like, oh man, that is way too hardcore for me. I am not up for that.
Okay.
I don't think I want to do that.
A lot of people feel that way. It's intense.
And I forget which episode you were talking about this conception, and I know Cecil Birch has written about this, Immediate Action, has written about this conception that you have to get ready. to go to a training class. Like, oh yeah, I want to go to ECQC, but I feel like I need to do like at least a couple of years of jiu-jitsu before I go to ECQC.
Yes.
And that idea that you need to do all this work on yourself before you can legitimately benefit from the training just virtually guarantees you'll never actually go do the training.
Absolutely.
Because the motivation to actually get on the mat is way, way more when you have a training experience where you realize how inadequate your current skill set is. You go, oh, wow, I did not have the tools to handle this problem. I got 10 seconds into this situation, and the entire rest of the time, I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I clearly was not ready for that. That is a perfectly legitimate and valuable training class outcome.
Absolutely.
I just realized how big my deficit is. And now I actually have some motivation to go do the incremental work to start to narrow that gap.
Yes.
Because until you really get your ass handed to you, there's always room to make excuses and say, well, I would have just this, or I would do that, or and then, before I started jiu-jitsu, I had a chance to take a 1-day force-on-force class. And there were a couple guys, there was at least one black belt in the class. But we did a section on grappling inside a vehicle. I wasn't aware at that time of Craig's VCAST class, but this was just grappling in the backseat of a car. And I was so unprepared. I had no clue how hard it was going to be to try to keep a person who had any idea how to grapple. I had no idea how to grapple. It was just catastrophic. It wasn't even really a fight. The other person could basically just frame me into the seat and hold me. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't think and problem solve fast enough to come up with a single useful action to take other than to hyperventilate and gas out and flail around. It's like, no, zero progress made.
And at that point, they're just waiting you out.
At that point that I'm not going to fix that problem in a weekend class a couple times a year. Because watching the black belt get in the car and a blue belt try to grapple with him, and watching the black belt just frame and control the other guy's limbs and gradually work into a top position and just completely dominate that without really even having to exert himself that hard, because he was able to connect himself so effectively to the structure of the car and use it. It was amazing to me. I'd never seen anything like that. That was really motivating for me. And that was one of the things that really stuck the point in my mind that I need to find a gym. I need to go start jiu-jitsu. And so in late February, almost exactly 6 years ago, mid to late February 2018, I just looked up jiu-jitsu gyms in my area, found one that was close to me, looked to see if they had a class that day. They had a class that night at 6:30 p.m. And I just told my wife, hey, I'm going to skip dinner and I'm going to jiu-jitsu. And she went, what? And I didn't really know I had the address. I didn't know the building. I didn't know anybody there. I just showed up. I walked in. I introduced myself. I was scared to death. They let me do the class in my street clothes. I had to take my belt off. But, just T-shirt and pants. And went out there and did the class. And I spent my first class mostly just working on solo drills and having one of the blue belts show me through some basic positions and introduce me to the concepts of posture and pressure and frames. And I came back home and I'd been doing a bunch of solo shrimping drills, and my shoulders were raw. Mats are, if you don't have a rash guard on, you're just in a cotton T-shirt and you're just doing bridging and shrimping drills. I came back home, my shoulders were red, and I took a photo and I sent it to a friend of mine who's a brown belt. I'm like, hey, Scott, check this out. I got on the mat tonight. He's like, great start. Give it a few months. Your shoulders will toughen up. It'll be fine, but get a rash guard. And I went, okay. You Google, what's a rash guard? I didn't even know what a rash guard was.
Right.
But that decision to just today, find a gym. I'm going to go for it. I don't have a long-term plan for how this is going to fit into my schedule. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it because gym memberships are not free. But I'm just going to go. I have to jump into this pool. I have to do it.
Right.
And what I've found there in the past 6 years is a ton of great friends, an ever-changing challenge, because, everybody gradually finds their own game, how they like to roll, what positions they like, what subs they like, where they really struggle. And I'm surrounded by people who are all on their own individual journey with their body type, with their reach, with their weight, with their preferred pace and style of play. And it's really exciting. And there you see, even in just 6 years, you see a lot of people come and go. The number of people that I've seen get their blue belt and just vanish is a bunch. Yeah. Present company accepted, of course.
No.
But, we see a lot of new white belts who stick around for a couple of months and then don't come back. I've just seen a lot of students. It's not for everybody. It really is an odd crowd of people.
Yes.
But
it is
a very realistic, friendly crowd of people in a lot of ways. Every gym has some people who are jerks. I think every single gym does.
Absolutely.
And you can figure out who those people are, and you can avoid them most of the time. Right. Sometimes for drills and things where you're just rotating and it's not choose your own partner for a live round. Sometimes you get stuck drilling or doing situational sparring with people you don't like. And there is a ditch on the other side, which is if you have your training bestie and the two of you are only ever roll with each other or only ever drill with each other, you're missing out on the opportunity to try it out on somebody 50 pounds heavier than you or 8 inches taller than you, or somebody who has grips that you just can't break, or somebody who's so flexible that your normal pass just doesn't bother them.
Yes. That's such a good point.
I love my gym. There's great people there.
Good.
And I love going, even though
awesome.
It's exhausting. I come back home every night after class just whipped. We have we normally have a Friday night comp class. I remember Paul Sharp talked about their comp class, and the comp class is hardcore. There really isn't. There's some brief hand fighting or takedowns for warm up, and then it's just live rounds for an hour and a half. Just go, go, go. And I come back from that completely wiped out. Yes. And always glad that I went.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good description. And there's nothing quite like a Jiu-Jitsu family. I remember when I was pre-med, I freaking disliked, that's a nice word. My mom would be proud for not saying hated. All of the pre-med students I was with because they were so stressed out. And if you did anything outside of pre-med, they would judge you so hard. Mm-hmm. They'd be like, where are you going? And it was like Mean Girls. It was like, where are you going? And I was like, to Jiu-Jitsu. And they'd be like,
on Wednesdays, we wear scrubs.
Exactly. Okay. Yes, that was really good. Yes, exactly. And I would go to Jiu-Jitsu and it was like, some dude was a father of 5. You had your guy that was engineering, and then you had your girl who was a cop, and just like someone from every walk of life, just there to do the same thing as you. And they thought it was so interesting that I was pre-med. They'd ask me questions, and we would go hang out. We party a little bit. I threw some parties back in the day with my crew.
I have not been to a single party with my jiu-jitsu peeps. Not one.
Man, there's pros and cons to it.
I'm middle-aged now.
Well, you get to know people like really well, and I don't know. I think that it actually ended up being harmful at one point. Back in the day, I won't mention the name of the gym, but one of my instructors did advance one of our students. Or I guess, what am I saying? Propositioned one of my students. Oh. Yeah. And it drove a wrench in all of the females at the gym because of the way he did it. And, if it was like I don't know, if they were the same age and vibing, like, why not? Maybe. But, like, that's a very nuanced area. My rule when I was single was never to date anyone in the same gym because of a negative experience with a past instructor, actually. So what you said earlier really did speak to me. And this situation drove just a hella wrench. So I don't know. It may not be the best
It's the
thing to
same. It's
do.
the same way in the self-defense industry with instructors and students in classes.
Yes.
The responsibility you take on when you are an instructor or a teacher and you're training people, that is not a dating pool.
No.
Should not be a dating pool for you. And that's not to say that you can't ever date somebody who was your student, but like the class is not a dating pool.
Yes.
And yeah, the complications that come from instructors blurring those lines and blending those worlds is really destructive, and it can break apart a whole gym. It can destroy the progress and the entire journey of a number of students all at once.
Yes.
It can really do a lot of damage. There have been far fewer than there should be public blow-ups in gyms in the past 5 years in jiu-jitsu over abuse allegations. There's a lot more that goes unreported, undiscussed. You know, if I knew of a certain gym and I wouldn't send my wife or my daughter there to train because of what I've heard about the gym and the guys there, that's a problem. And it's hard to talk about because a lot of it exists in this gray area of what's the name of the book? The book is Creepology. I don't remember the author's name. Do you know that book?
No, but
It's called
I want to read it.
I think it's called Self-Defense for Your Social Life. Annette recommended it to me. It's really excellent, and it particularly focuses on understanding how to recognize and articulate what is wrong with predatory and non-consensual social interactions that are in that gray area, that they don't clearly rise to the level of being criminal, but they're invasive and upsetting and inappropriate. And a lot of guys play in that space.
Yes.
Jiu-jitsu is a highly intimate art. You end up very, very closely in contact with a lot of people's bodies in ways you would not anywhere else.
Yeah.
For me, actually, the big hurdle for jiu-jitsu was I was diagnosed with pretty severe OCD when I was in high school. I had to be on medication and therapy and a bunch of stuff. And for me, my main issue was contamination. Certain textures and things that I would touch would bother me for days. The first time that I had somebody put me in knee-on belly and then bend over to me to cross-collar choke me, and while he was cross-collar choking me, his sweat was dripping into my open mouth. I finished up that round on the mat, and I'm like, all right, I'm not good with that,
right?
But I'm also not dead,
right?
And if I can get through that, where I'm drowning and he's kneeling on me and I can't get out and he's sweating in my mouth.
Yep.
And I can come back from that and get back on the mat and be okay. I'm going to be okay.
Yep. Man, exposure
but still,
therapy.
you know, there have been times when things on the mat grossed me out more than others. Everybody has met Stinky Gee Guy at our gym. That was William. And you just go, I don't want to touch this person.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I remember one of the female students at our gym complaining about this guy. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make a point. Anytime this guy shows up, I'm going to make sure I get at least one round with him, maybe two. Because that's going to be 2 less rounds that any of the female students in my gym have to go with this gross dude.
That's really nice.
He was gross and he was increasingly inappropriate, and he's no longer at our gym.
Yeah, those dudes, man.
Yeah, there's
few people pop up in my head. Just absolutely.
The difference between a good training partner and that felt like a bad touch is often hard to really concretely articulate. But like, you know, that person got to this weird position in the past and then stayed there too long.
Yes.
What's up with that?
Yes.
Those kind of things. I think probably every gym, I know I've seen it happen, but I think in every gym that has a decent number of female students, there's an informal communication network about who is and is not safe to roll with. And that's not just like so-and-so is creepy. You can get creepy guys in the gym, and you will. But even just like, hey, this person is really strong and moves too fast and tends to muscle submissions, or this person, people just, the word gets around about who you can reliably train with, because everybody wants to keep playing the game. The
Right.
goal is to get on the mats and stay on the mats. The goal is not to get injured out every year. And some people are more injury prone, are less coordinated. Their physiology is just more prone to get hurt. But if you have somebody that you know is likely to injure you, I have certain people that I have known in my 6 years where I'm like, I rolled with that person one time and I'm like, nope, If that person tries to flag me down for a round, I'm just incredibly oblivious. I don't understand why I didn't see you waving your hands and calling my name. I'm sorry. I didn't see you. I just happened to find somebody
Right.
else 10 rounds in a row.
My bad. Yep.
It's a mystery. It's a mystery.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the picture of the guy that holds positions long, I remember hearing about this guy that all the girls were told to avoid because they felt like his intentions for rolling with women was not to make women better and like to give them an opportunity to learn. It was like to hold them. And I remember being like, what? Like, that's a thing? What's going on?
Oh, that's totally a thing.
It's
And even in
totally a
Craig's
thing.
classes, like when you're the bad guy in a muck evo, right, you want to be a good training partner, which means you need to have there be enough salt to actually verbally jar the other person.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, I want to be a nice person, and I don't want to make my female training partner have a really negative experience in this evo. I don't want to say something, because you could easily think of things to say that would be incredibly transgressive and upsetting.
Yes.
It's not hard to think of those things. And you
Yeah.
can easily say to yourself, well, if I were a bad guy, what would I say to wig this person out and decrease her ability to think and make good decisions and defend herself?
Yes.
And you don't want to just be like, hey, give me your money or else.
Yep.
Because then they're not getting any value out of the training. You don't want to roll with that person and be like, okay, I'm going to go 20% on this person because, like Fezzik, I want you to feel you're doing well. No,
Yes.
that false sense of confidence isn't actually helpful, doesn't make them safer. At the same time, I've talked to Annette about this a number of times because she's a petite purple belt. And when she goes up against bigger, stronger guys, like, she's like, yeah, I can get to mount, and they can literally just deadlift me off. They can just press me bodily up in the air and just drop me off to the side. If you get nothing but that, it's also demoralizing and hard to improve and hard to make progress and just is frustrating. So that art of how to be a good training partner, I think, is undertaught. I would love to see more content. I'd love to see more content about how to be an excellent training partner.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely. Yeah.
I've seen some gnarly things happen in videos from Craig's classes. I've seen some gnarly things happen. The kinds of impromptu aggressive dialogue that students come up with in the muck portion of the class is often really interesting because you can watch a sentence make somebody else's gears grind so hard that they can't process the drilled skill that they were literally just practicing. You say the right thing to them and they short circuit.
Yep.
Even if just for a couple of seconds, you say something to them and they go, and you can see them buffering while they go, should I stab him for that? Or should I keep talking?
Yes.
And that's really interesting how that works.
Yes. So have you ever met, and I've told this story only one other time on the podcast, but I like to resurface certain stories that are just worth it because especially with different guest speakers, have you ever met like a Krav Maga guy? Krav Maga guy. You know what I'm talking about. And hear me out. I have taken Krav Maga. There are some really awesome things I learned from Krav, especially about how to be aggressive, how to get your stance, that like the pre-fight stuff. I learned that in Krav, like my first time ever. So not all Krav is bad. I'm just saying that in case anyone's listening and they feel
I
triggered
have
right
some good
now.
friends who are very into Krav, and I support them.
Yes, exactly. This guy at ECQC, and actually, I recently ended up unfollowing him. I connect with people at classes, and I don't care who I follow. Oh, well, don't get me wrong. I have to like know you, have met you, or just really think that your content is valuable.
Interesting, valuable, relevant, something.
Yes, or I want to watch your journey. So those are the three reasons I follow people. And sometimes it's out of obligation because I'm like, I don't want to be rude. Anyway, just being
Yeah.
transparent. It'd be like that sometimes. But this guy, right? Um, let me tell you what he did at ECQC, and then I'll tell you what he DM'd me. But at ECQC, this guy came up. Craig told one of the guys to come up and just like, I think, ask about jumping his car for him or something very benign, but like
Mhm.
told him to like come up and be a little like sketchy, like kind of moving and stuff. So this guy walks up, and almost immediately this Croft guy kicks him in the groin
Yes.
in the middle of an
Oh
ECQC
no.
sim. I've
Oh,
never seen Craig say stop like faster than that. And of course, I've only been to ECQC once, but we all like stopped and were like, that can't be right. This guy, he was like, oh, my bad. Like, I shouldn't have done
I
that.
just
Like, I
saw
got really
black. My
anxious.
killer instinct.
Yeah.
My training kicked in.
Actually, now that I think about it, he didn't say I'm sorry. That was another thing that hit me. He was like, oh, like Craig said, don't do that. And the guy was like, oh. And the other guy was like literally holding his crotch.
Yeah, he got kicked in
And
the groin.
yeah. And it didn't look like this guy had like much remorse. It was really weird. So we connected on social because he walked up and he was like, hey, nice to meet you. He told me all about all the training he's done and,
Of course
you
he
know,
did.
about how amazing he thinks it is that there are women there kind of thing. And I was like, oh, dude, thanks. Yeah, totally, totally. And so I followed him back and he DM'd me one time and he was like, you don't need to look when you reholster. Like, you're losing tactical advantage. And I was like, wait, what? Like, and all I did was just respond and say, hey, man, like, I really don't think
Appreciate
this
your
type
input.
of extremist talk is good. Like, it was the way he said it too. I was like, and then I kind of explained, like, I would never holster my weapon unless the scene was safe. So why would I risk pulling the, like, a negligent discharge towards my body? And I
A
was like, kind
misfire? What?
of, yeah, exactly. Oh my God. And I started explaining this, just having a conversation. I didn't even come off as defensive, or so I thought. It's biased, obviously, but um, he wrote back just like the most like, it's your gunfight. If you want to get hurt, then it's on you, kind of thing. And I was like, okay, bye. I like unfollowed him because it wasn't at that point. It wasn't a conversation, but yes, there are people that just do crazy things during training. That guy, he did not do his sim. He had to sit out. He was hurt the
Yep.
rest of the time. That guy took that from him.
Yeah.
Interesting when that happens.
I had a negative experience in a force
Mm.
on force class where I made a mistake and could have seriously injured a role player.
Oh,
And
man.
that took me out of the training circuit for almost a year because it was just
Oh man.
it was emotionally and mentally very difficult for me. And what
Yeah.
had happened was I basically ended up slamming a guy's arm and leg in a car door in a scenario when
Oh.
I was not trying to hit him with the door. I
Right.
was trying to close the door and get away from the vehicle and was
Ah.
not thinking at all that he was still partly in the door frame.
Oh man.
And
Yeah.
those force on force classes were specifically non-contact. There was no
Oh.
grappling, there was no sparring. It was a lot of muck kind of stuff, a lot of verbal interactions,
Okay.
and sim
Yeah.
guns were in play, flashlights were in play, but it was not combatives.
Interesting. Why is
And
that? Am I missing something?
so the focus of those courses really was on decision making prior to needing to use tools.
Okay.
And so for that reason, we had a number of older people in the class. It was not the kind of thing where you wanted a bunch of guys grappling, and it was in a simulated town that had parked cars and buildings you could go inside and multiple staff role players. The floors were all concrete. There was no padding. It was not a grappling environment.
I see.
And
I
so they
see.
did not want, there was the only real rules for physical safety in class were you always keep your PPE on, because they had the whole thing enclosed off. All students who were not in the active scenario, you'd go into your scenario as solos. All the scenarios were solo. There could be a variety of role players doing different things, but
Right.
students entered the scenario one at a time. There was no, Streets of Rage Contra tag team player two with you. You were always by yourself. And it was no running, because they didn't want you to like trip over the curb and fall. And there was no contact shots and no putting hands on the role players.
I see.
And I slammed this dude in the car door with my full body weight. And the lead instructor was on me so fast. And he just grabbed me and he pushed me up against the car and said, "What are you doing?"
Oh, man.
And I was just like completely deflated, just crushed. Because obviously, like, the role player is a friend of mine. I've trained with him in a number of other classes. I'm not trying to hurt him.
Of course.
I wasn't trying to hurt him.
Of course.
In that moment, I thought, I have to close this door and get away from this vehicle as he's getting out of it. And I just slammed it on him. And he wasn't injured. And afterwards, he's like, "Hey, man, I totally understand. Sorry that happened." But like, I was done for the day at that point.
Yeah.
And the entire drive home, I'm just like in my car on the interstate driving home going like, should I even be doing this anymore? Like,
Right.
if I totally lost my frame of reference and my perspective at that moment, and I happened to not injure this person, but if he'd had his hand on the door frame, I could have absolutely wrecked the next 6 months of this guy's life by just destroying his hand.
Oh, that's tough.
And the instructor, who was a friend of mine, was also so angry. He was not out of control, but he was very angry. The only times I've ever seen him get angry is when somebody did something in class that was unsafe and endangered the role players.
Right.
And then he would go from like 0 to 100 miles an hour instantly.
Yeah.
And I always thought, I'm going to be the good student. I'm going to be a good training partner. I'm going to show up. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to come prepared. I'm going to read the class list. I'm going to do all these things well. I'm going to be a good student. That was the, get straight A's, practice every day. I'm going to check all these boxes.
Yes.
And to have that kind of obvious breakdown in front of everybody that led to me being done for the day was such a huge blow to my ego. It was so hard to come back from that.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Yeah.
But if that hadn't happened to me in training, and I hadn't had to go through that experience simulated, if something like that had happened and I really injured somebody that I cared about in real life because I couldn't think and I just panicked and did something, that would be so much worse.
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
Thank you for sharing that, by the way.
You're going to see people in class do things that you don't like and don't feel safe around, and you can be the person that does that. And you can be the person that does that despite your best intentions. I've seen people in classes and on the mats who I think that person's looking for an excuse to hurt somebody. I don't want to drill with them.
100%. Yes. The difference here is that you actually felt remorse. Like, you didn't intend to. It sounds like you apologized.
No, I felt horrible. I was super apologetic.
I can imagine.
But I was also I was shocked at myself. Course. Yeah. And I was incredibly embarrassed.
Yeah.
To be the person who forces the instructors to end the scenario because you did something really unsafe. Like, you don't want to be the person in a live fire class who gets yelled off the line because of unsafe gun handling.
Yes.
You don't
100%.
want to be the person that does a thing that endangers or worse, injures or kills another student, obviously. But that risk is always there. Even when you're just rolling at jiu-jitsu, if you do something stupid, you can permanently injure somebody.
Absolutely.
You can be the reason why Bill's knee is never the same again.
Yes, 100%. In the sim training, my helmet was turning to the side, and I had told Craig, I actually emailed him before ECQC, and I said, I don't know if I can do this course because of my nose. And he was like, don't
Yep.
worry, we're not going to do any combatives unless we have a helmet on. And
Okay.
during one of the sims, my helmet started turning, and it was literally pushing my nose in the direction that it was broken, in the same freaking direction. And I started to panic, and I couldn't tap because my hands were pinned. Actually, my hand was on the gun. That's why my hands were pinned. The guy had it like stacked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was yelling in my helmet. I was squirming, obviously, because I was trying to like get out. I finally just stopped moving, like kind of went limp. But the dude pulled the gun, and I had my finger in the trigger guard, which was my bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I had my finger in the trigger guard. I'm trying to find something, and when he ripped it out, he like turned the gun, and I
Mm-hmm.
jammed my finger so bad I went home with like a swollen finger. I remember calling my fiance or boyfriend at the time because he just got his like EMT license. I was like, is it broken? But I was also trying to act, really cool. And I was like, good job, dude. Like other hand high five. Because I was so just like, and he shot me a few times too, literally insult to injury or injury to insult. So grabbed the gun,
Injury to
backed
injury.
off, shot. I was like, yeah, I know. Like, I'm done. Like,
You made your point.
Yes, exactly. But yes, absolutely. And that guy didn't know any better, but that was a training error on my part. I feel like I shouldn't have had my finger in the trigger, but that's also tough because at that point I was still learning. Like, when was it appropriate to brandish the weapon? When was it appropriate to try to fire? Like,
Yeah.
at that point the gun was pointed away from me, so I don't think my finger should have been on the trigger. And that was a big lesson. It was one of those like the guy was told to get my gun from my waistband kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
he was pulling that gun out before I ever wanted to. So the gun was out, and it's like my finger got in there. I don't even remember how it did. I wasn't even thinking straight. My mic is moving so much right now. But yeah, like I wasn't thinking straight, and I caused myself an injury and compromised the whole sim kind of thing. It had to end, it was over. I was either break my nose or like and like have my ego, intact, or like crush my ego, save my nose. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I had a really interesting conversation with John and Sarah Hopman recently,
Mm-hmm.
and because we've all taken a wide variety of classes, we've trained with a bunch of different people and seen. We've also, one of the advantages of being in the gear industry is sometimes you get to just go audit classes, even if you can't be there for the whole weekend and you can't participate. You can show up and see part of the class, observe what's going on. Occasionally, like I've just showed up to a class where I was going to be there for the half the day and just brought along some sample gear for students to play with when they're not the one in the scenario. Just I want them to check it out and give me their feedback on it. But the question that I asked John and Sarah, which we tossed around for a while and didn't really come to an answer on, but is what criteria, when do students have permission and authority to step in and stop something that's happening in the training environment? And this could be like, I mean, if you're on a live fire range and you've got 20 students, one lead instructor and one assistant, if you see somebody doing something unsafe and neither of the instructors saw it, do you have the ability, the authority to call ceasefire? Do you have a responsibility to call ceasefire? In Craig's classes, I've seen like one time, a dude just got his helmet punched off his head, just knocked off his head. The second mandatory PPE is off, everyone's yelling, stop,
Right.
stop. Because you want to make sure that nobody gets clocked when they don't have their helmet on. Yeah. But I could not think of an instance where I'd been in a training class where the instructors, as part of the pre-class safety brief, said, if any of the following conditions occur, whether I or one of the assistant instructors sees them or not, we expect you, we require you, for the safety of everybody here, to immediately call for a stop, whatever the command for that class. Craig uses break. Some classes use ceasefire. There's a variety of different commands. Different schools and different trainers have their own preference.
Yes.
But I don't to my recollection, I've never been in a class where that skeleton key is handed to every student in the pre-class brief and says, if this happens or that happens, not only can you feel free to if you want to, but I expect you to stop it.
Yes.
And that is, I feel like that's a missing piece. I don't really know how big the piece is, or that's just been in my mind a lot the past year. Because you're responsible for your own safety, but when you participate in a class, you're responsible for everybody else's safety in a real way too. And when you carry a firearm out in public, you are responsible for how that tool impacts the safety of everybody else around you, which is why no go on gun buckets. So tying that all back to what I do for a living, which is make holsters. Our focus is almost exclusively on appendix carry of compact and full-size guns. We are pretty much exclusively concealment carry focused. We're not doing hunting rigs. We're not doing competition rigs. When people talk about the holster market, I usually respond with, well, there's about a dozen different markets inside the holster market. The same way that the firearms market is not a single market. Are you doing precision long range? Are you doing, Western style reenactment with 6-shooters and Winchesters?
Right.
There's so many sub markets within the market that in the holster field, there are other holster companies that make tens of thousands of units a year that overlap with what my company makes 0%. Because they're exclusively in the competition space, or they're in the hunting space, and they focus on holsters for Magnum revolvers, 41 and 44 mag and bear guns. And there's all this different stuff in that industry. What I've focused our company on is high performance concealment holsters for people who carry a gun all the time and want to make the signature of that gun basically invisible in all their normal clothing and in all their normal social contexts. Not like, I dress this way most of the time, but when I carry my gun, I put on a 3XL hoodie and just, that's how I conceal.
Yeah.
We want customers to be able to dress the way that suits them.
Right.
Obviously, there are always limitations. You can't carry a giant gun in skin-tight clothing, and no matter what your build is, and expect that it's going to conceal. But the Concealment Workshop, Filster's Concealment Workshop on Facebook is an unbelievable resource. And a lot of concealment stuff, the testing is your daily wear. You will not always know. Most of the time, you won't know if somebody who's a stranger to you notices your firearm. Because most people know, if I spot somebody who I think has a gun on them, I'm generally not going to walk up and say, "Excuse me, miss, the edge of your blouse is caught on the grip of your gun, and I can see that you have a canic."
Right.
They're just not going to engage. And whether or not they're happy to see you have a firearm or not, or whether they complain to the management of the store you're in or consider calling the cops on you, there's all these potential outcomes that you have no control over. And it's not that concealment is the end-all, be-all for self-defense, but if you give up concealment, you start off any potential fight at a much more substantial deficit. As Craig points out in his class, one of the things we see, what he calls the criminal assault paradigm, is you often see unequal initiative, unequal armament, and more than one person involved. So somebody initiates, you either ambush or you get ambushed, and rarely do you have knife on knife, golf club on golf club, pickleball racket on pickleball racket. People show up with unequal armament, and you have to cope with both the unequal initiative, the unequal armament, and in some cases, more than one bad guy.
Right.
The more information that the other party has about you, the more that they can discern about your equipment and what they can deduce from that about your likely capabilities, the more that unequal initiative can really come into play. And the timing and the position of when they choose to engage you can be very different. If you know somebody has a gun, then there's a much higher premium on approaching them and starting off by hitting them over the head with a bottle of wine from the shelf next to you, or something where you just never have to deal with it. Whereas you might just walk up to some random person and say, hey, give me your phone and your wallet. Right. I mean, I wouldn't, you wouldn't, probably, I don't know. But a bad guy who knows that the other team has significant tools at their disposal will be more likely, if they decide to proceed, they'll be more likely to proceed at a higher level of force sooner, because they don't want those tools to come into play. No bad guys. They're looking, I'm trying to think, what did Craig say? Or was it William? He said they're looking for a payday, not a gunfight.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
Craig does say that.
This is transactional.
Right.
When Craig talked about being an undercover narcotics officer, and he's like, yeah, I got stuck up and robbed at gunpoint a number of times, and in most cases, I went back the very next day to try to buy drugs from that same person who had just stuck a gun in my face the previous day. And you might say, that's crazy. Why would you do that? And he said, well, that's what addicts do. If I'm a drug buyer, that's the mode of behavior that I'm going to be in. It's just transactional. That stick up was business as usual. And that's so foreign to us.
Yes, absolutely.
But on the concealment side, the way that John and I and Sarah define concealment is a person would have to noticeably violate social norms in terms of physical distance, contact, or gaze in order to discern that you have the firearm. Like if somebody is bump checking you, or they're touching you inappropriately to discern that you have a firearm, if they can't tell without doing that, the firearm is concealed. If they can't tell that you have a firearm in a passing glance, but they have to sit there and creeper stare you for 15 seconds and look to see if they can't discern without violating social norms about distance and touch and gaze, then you're generally effectively concealing your tools, whether that's a firearm, pepper spray, a flashlight, a knife, whatever else you have that you're concealing. And I really do like the something between a harsh word and a gun approach. I think pepper spray is an underutilized, underappreciated tool.
Yes.
And it doesn't require anything besides the pepper spray to carry it. You can tuck it into a number of different places on your clothing. You can carry it in a pocket. You have tons of options. I often just, when I'm going to the jiu-jitsu gym, I just clip my pepper spray into the waistband of my sweatpants. I got my flashlight, my pepper spray, my keys, and my phone. And I'm going straight to the gym. I'm training. I'm getting back in my car. I'm going home. I'm not going out to the mall. I'm not running around and doing a bunch of errands. I'm not wandering around downtown. For me, the gym is a discrete errand. I go do it. I go home.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this part 1 with Andrew Henry of Henry Holsters. This episode is going so well that we decided to make it a part 1 and 2. So if you're interested in listening to part 2, hop on over to that episode now, and we're just going to read some end of show notes. Thank you so much for listening today. For exclusive video content, head over to the Patreon. You can visit She Shield on Instagram and TikTok for show updates, pictures of our guest speakers, and podcast highlights. Thank you to Sagetta Gear, one of the official sponsors of She Shield. For concealed carry gear and duty gear, use code SheShield10 for 10% off your Sagetta Gear order. All resources mentioned in part 1 will be available in the show notes, which are the notes below the title. If you like the podcast, you can help extremely by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. And if you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis, look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization that will connect you with your local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you. The link to access their website is in the show notes. In the meantime, stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you in part 2.